give way to smart contracts. Next slide. So everybody seems to begin with, here's who I am and here's my credentials. So I thought I'd do that. I've been thinking about private currency for a long time, before there was Bitcoin, even before there was DigiCash. So since 1979, I think, I've been writing about private currency systems, their historical evolution. This article is, the first one is about how private money emerged historically. The book, Free Banking in Britain, is about, private money systems, and I've come to realize just today that the banknotes issued by banks under gold and silver standards were a kind of analog tokenization of precious metals. We can think of them that way. I wrote about DigiCash back in the 90s, and recently I've tried to understand the market for cryptocurrencies. And kind of the takeaway of this article is that the remarkable innovation of Bitcoin that none of us saw coming in the economics community is that there have been traditionally two ways of giving value to a token, to something that can be produced at a value greater than the cost of production. Right? So the producer of that has to convince people that the value won't fall eventually to the cost of production, leaving them high and dry. And the two traditional methods in banking, it was a price guarantee, a commitment to buy back banknotes or checking deposits in exchange for the gold or silver in the bank vault. That was the traditional model. In the art market, in market for limited edition artworks, like numbered prints, you had a different model. You have the quantity commitment. This is print number 160 out of 300. If you see a duplicate print number 160 out of 300, you know you've been defrauded and you have an action at common law. But nobody thought that that was a model for issuing something that would serve as currency, because right, that's a commitment not to issue more units, but it doesn't do anything to nail down the price or the relative price, the purchasing power of that asset. And yet that's what Bitcoin has done quite remarkably. But it does mean the price is volatile, because it's the quantity that's nailed down, not the price. And I'll come back to that, but that's a disadvantage in a payment mechanism. So to talk about the contrast between smart contracts and central banks, let's be clear about what central banks do. Oh, I should say that my conclusion from all this research on private monetary systems was that the establishment of central banks was a mistake. It wasn't necessary. Private monetary systems were quite good at self-governance, a theme that we talked about this morning. But central banks have nationalized what private monetary systems used to do. In particular, they've taken over interbank clearing and settlement. And they've taken over the issue of currency, which used to be a private matter. They do other things that are less relevant to us here today. They regulate commercial banks in some countries. In other countries, that's a separate agency. They're called upon to bail out or make last resort loans in the case of a financial crisis, and they conduct monetary policy. But focus on the first two, because those are things that cryptocurrencies do. Well, at least potentially, they can handle interbank clearing and settlement. Certainly, they provide a kind of currency. So clearing and settlement is a process of reconciling transactions that are taking place during the day. They're reconciled at the end of the day. And before the Federal Reserve System took this business over, it was done by commercial bank clearinghouses that were private member clubs, the members being the major commercial banks in each city in the United States and in other countries, similar systems. And it was a members-only system where they were settling up, right? So during the day, each would be collecting claims on the other members. At the end of the day, they would settle up by saying, what do I owe you? What do you owe me? Let's pay the difference. And the way they found convenient to pay the difference was, we'll pay the difference in claims on gold warehoused at the clearinghouse. So we'll just transfer ownership. We don't have to move the gold around. This kind of system survives today in the foreign exchange market. A private institution called the CLS Bank for Continuous Linked Settlement, that was the original name, is owned by the banks that participate in foreign exchange transactions. And in this kind of system, all the banks participate at the clearinghouse, and there's one ledger. Right? There's just one ledger that records the transfer of ownership of clearinghouse assets from member to member. So that's the way settlement takes place. It's a very efficient system, and it scales up well. You add more banks to the system, it's not a big deal. You just have another line of liability holders on the balance sheet of the clearing bank. Settlement on a distributed ledger, like blockchain, is a much more complicated matter. It's a system that's great for dealing with strangers. It's less appropriate in a system like I've just been describing, where you have a small number of known parties interacting. But it makes it possible to deal with strangers by every node having its own copy of the ledger and transactions having to be reconciled throughout the entire system, which provides a great deal of security, but unfortunately at the cost of a great deal of duplication. A lot of computing power is consumed. It doesn't scale well. Every time you add a node, everything has to be duplicated more times. So it's an expensive system in real time. And so, as has been mentioned this morning, as we all know, blockchains are too slow to process very many retail transactions. Number I read was 4 to 7 transactions per 7. Somebody said 10 this morning, but in any case, it's many orders of magnitude less than Visa and MasterCard can process in real time. And Nick Szabo, who was mentioned this morning, I think has an insightful take on it. He said, look, blockchain was designed to, Bitcoin was designed in a sense to provide security in transactions with strangers, but it comes at a cost of computational inefficiency and lack of scalability. So you can't really imagine putting every coffee sale on blockchain. Now, maybe there are other distributed ledger technologies that are faster than blockchain. I'm sure there are people in this room who know more about those projects than I do, but the way to fix the problem in blockchain that's been most discussed is having side chains. So having retail transactions processed off the chain and then reconciled periodically, maybe at the end of the day. And a version of this is already here. There are already Bitcoin-denominated debit cards, and you can imagine credit cards and things like bank accounts, things where you can transfer ownership off the chain and have it reconciled at the end of the day. But these kind of processes reintroduce traditional banking in the sense that there needs to be a trusted intermediary who's holding the money during the day, who's making a commitment to pay at the end of the day, and somebody has to trust them to actually deliver at the end of the day. So that brings you back to a clearing arrangement, and if the clearing arrangement is among a known set of interacting institutions, trust isn't really a problem. So you don't need a solution to the problem of lack of trust. It doesn't seem to me that blockchain is the appropriate technology for efficient settlement at a clearinghouse. Instead, a banker's bank seems to be the efficient way to do it. I've taken an interest in projects to link gold transactions to blockchain, and here I think there's an important role to be played by asset tokenization. So imagine a numbered gold bar, and we can make it a small gold bar so it's a reasonable sized transaction. It's in a vault somewhere. The vault keeper creates a token representing ownership of that bar of gold. That token can now be traded, and it's a much easier way to change ownership of the gold in the vault than analog methods or going to the vault keeper and saying, here's how we want to make a transaction. So that has a lot of potential as a way of making gold ownership a lot more liquid. So there's a lot of people who are invested in owning gold. And in fact, the quantity of gold owned privately as investments is about $1.7 trillion according to the World Gold Council, which is larger than the $100 billion currently in Bitcoin. Well, it's gone up since last night. But recreating a payment system denominated in gold means reintroducing gold-denominated banking, because warehousing is not really the most efficient model for making payments. But this is the challenge, that you have to trust the people holding the gold or promising to pay gold. And this is Szabo again. You have to figure out ways to make sure that the assets that are being tokenized are really there, that you can really trust the issuer of the token. Once it's on the blockchain, that preserves the transaction record, but as Szabo says, it doesn't guarantee the truth of the claim that there's gold in the vault. It just preserves that claim. Now, there are two other well-known constraints on using Bitcoin or Ether or any other cryptocurrency as a method of retail payment. And that is, of course, there's an incumbent, the US dollar in the United States, other currencies in other places, that benefits from great network effects. And that's just the simple idea that you want to be paid in something you know you can turn around and spend very readily. And so very few people, I used to say nobody I ever met was paid in Bitcoin, and then I met somebody from the Bitcoin Foundation. I wonder if their salary's been adjusted as the price of Bitcoin's gone up. But, very few people are paid in Bitcoin because they can't spend it at the grocery store. Right? They don't want to be paid in Bitcoin. Now, you cannot hold your assets in Bitcoin but spend dollars, but that means you have to convert every time. And those pesky exchange fees will eat you up. And the exchange fees aren't going to go away with advances in technology, because the bid-ask spread is not going to go away. Right? That's sort of fundamental to markets. It can get small as the market gets more liquid, but it's not going to go away. So having a debit card where your holdings are in Bitcoin, but it pays in dollars and charges you an exchange fee every time, plus a transaction fee, is an expensive way to make your daily transactions. So that's the network problem. You can call it a chicken and egg problem. Nobody's going to hold much Bitcoin for transacting purposes until there's a lot of things they can buy with Bitcoin without converting. Right? But most merchants don't want to be paid in Bitcoin, because what do they use it for? And of course, the third problem is price volatility. And here's a chart of price volatility of Bitcoin versus price volatility of gold. Gold's a fairly volatile asset in purchasing power terms compared to the US dollar, but Bitcoin has it beat. And as I mentioned, gold already has a larger network. So for overcoming those problems of familiarity, willingness to accept it, and low volatility, there's some prospect of making gold an alternative medium of exchange, provided there's an easy way to transact with it, and I think asset tokenization may provide that. So, summarizing, smart contracts solve an important problem, and Bitcoin solves an important problem, which is transacting with parties you don't trust. The transaction gets uploaded to a publicly inspectable chain, and nobody can deny that it took place. But interbank settlement, if transactions are moved off-chain and then settled later, the settlement process is not one of those problems. At least in typical payment networks, it involves small numbers of well-known parties. So research and development seems more rationally directed toward, as somebody was saying this morning, uses that are native to blockchain, that can't be done without blockchain as efficiently. So there are a lot of projects, and I'm sure some of you know more of these than I do, to do that. Any financial transaction is now done over the counter or done by brokerage between parties who don't know each other is a candidate for taking place on blockchain to reduce the trust problem. The problem of counterfeit Calvin Kleins can be solved by having a blockchain recorded code stamped on the tag that's sewn into the jeans, and then that can be verified as genuine if you care about it. I mean, a lot of people who buy knockoffs know they're getting knockoffs. Ship registries so that ships can dock at ports that don't know them. So that's where I'm going to end. Thanks very much, and I'll be on the panel later for questions.